Thank you. I'll go ahead and call this board briefing meeting to order, the Utah Board of Water Resources board briefing meeting. It's a little bit past 10 a.m. on Thursday, June 20th, and 2024, and we are meeting at the Department of Natural Resources in Salt Lake City. I'm Juliette Tennert, and I have the great honor and pleasure of serving as chair this year, and so I will be coordinating over the meeting. Let's go ahead and start off with introductions. I will note that I believe board member Dana Van Horn is online, and Dana will just come to you at the end of the board member introductions. I should also mention that I serve as chair of this board, and I also represent Salt Lake and Tooele.
Mike Davis, Provo River Drainage, and I'm the vice chair.
Kyle Stevens, Weber River.
Charles Holmgren, Bear River Basin.
Brian Steed, Great Salt Lake.
Blaine Ibsen, Sevier River.
Spencer Jones, Lower Colorado.
Randy Crozier, Green River District.
My turn?
Yes.
Dana Van Horn, Upper Colorado District.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'll note that we have all of our board members present and participating today, and it's great to see gentlemen in person. And Dana, thank you so much for making it work to attend virtually. Why don't we mix things up a little bit? And before we go to Director Hassenjaeger to introduce those who are participating on behalf of the board and the department, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about a couple of new employees. And so I understand that Joel's going to make the introductions of Madison Martini and Ashley Sampson, some new folks on our team.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This microphone. Let's try this one. That sounds better. Happy to introduce two of our new employees today. Madison Martini joined the water conservation team. She's one of the water conservation coordinators. She has a bachelor's in environmental science and is working on a master's degree also in the same field, but wanting to focus on water and how we can better manage the water that we have in our conservation efforts. She has some great experience coming from Central Utah Water Conservancy District, where she worked there on their landscape incentive program, and now she's coming to help us run the landscape incentive program from the state side. She's excited to continue working with these programs and hopes to combine her personal research that she's done to help us increase our water conservation efforts. And then outside of work, Madison likes to be outdoors, hiking and camping with her husband and dog, and taking visits back to her home state of Washington. So that's Madison. Anything you want to add?
Maybe just, why don't any questions from the board for Madison? All right, thank you, welcome.
And then Ashley Sampson is our new office specialist, kind of helping with administration for our planning branch. She has a lot of experience, came to us with 14 years of kind of administrative experience, and has worked with teams in the service industry, storage industry, and with public safety. She enjoys collaboration, working on goals that improve our experiences with the world around us. And she considers herself a lifelong learner and tries to apply new ideas and information to everyday challenges. When she's not at work, she enjoys being in nature and cultivating relationships with friends and family.
Great.
Anything you want to add, Ashley?
All right, thank you. Welcome, Ashley. Does the board have any questions for Ashley? Well, thanks to you both for joining the team, and we need you. So thank you, and we appreciate the experience that you both bring. It's a real win for the team, so thanks. All right, thanks, Joel. All right, and I'll turn the time over to Director Hassenjaeger to introduce her team that is participating today.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. With us today, we have Joel Williams, Shalane DiBernardi, Marisa Egbert, Tom Cox, Russell Hadley, Ani Baynard, Ben Merritt, Brad Caldwell, Ethan Stainer, Michael Sanchez, Madison Martini, Ashley Sampson, and Shannon Clow is taking minutes. Thank you, Shannon. And then behind the curtain, as ever, our awesome AV team, Carmen McDonald and Seth Majors are
All
helping us
right.
out there.
Thank you very much for putting all of those folks onto the record. And of course, we always appreciate the hard work of the team. Let's go ahead and just jump into our briefing agenda. We've got a fairly full agenda today, but I feel like a lot of it is cleanup. So hopefully we'll keep things relatively brief. Let's just go ahead and go through the discussion of the items, and we can go ahead and start with the couple of feasibility reports that we have. Let's see, Peterson Pipeline Association, RE 481, and then RE 483, Davis and Weber Counties Canal Company. Those are both in Kyle Stevens' area. Who from the staff is going to be doing the briefing on these? Brad, are you? Okay, all right, very good. Okay, and maybe Brad, as you're coming up, maybe I'll just really quickly go to Kyle. Kyle, did you want to set this up at all?
No, I'll just let
Okay.
Brad go ahead and introduce the project.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Is this the one that works? Or-
Yeah, and I see a green light, so I think we're
Okay,
recording.
sounds good. All right, Madam Chair and the board, good morning. So Peterson Pipeline, the project aims to connect an existing culinary well to the Peterson Pipeline system by installing 12,100 feet of 8-inch PVC pipe and constructing a dedicated well house. The applicant serves 161 residential connections and an additional commercial, industrial, and institutional connections. The existing water system, which includes a 300 gallon per minute well and a 250,000 gallon storage tank, does not meet the Division of Drinking Water's requirement for a minimum of 2 sources for systems with over 100 connections. And a temporary exemption was granted, and construction of a second well with a target flow rate of 50 gallons per minute began in March 2024, and that was through their own funds. And this project is crucial for regulatory compliance, and that is staff's report.
great. Thanks, Brad. Any questions or comments from the board? Feels pretty straightforward. I assume that the representatives for the application will be here with us in the
Yes,
meeting?
they'll be online.
Okay, great, thank you. Kyle, are you good to make the motion on that one?
I am. I have just looking
Yeah.
at it here quickly, a question relative to the financial feasibility. I see where, it indicates that they could pay up to roughly $95 a month, but adding this all up will be $139 a month. Have they had any pushback from the residents relative to the cost increase associated with the project?
The board president hasn't mentioned any pushback that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So,
With that then, Madam Chair, I'll be prepared to make the motion.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you. I think it makes sense to ask that question, Kyle, in the meeting, and maybe you could give them a heads up that it's coming. I think it'd
Sure.
be helpful. I'd
Yeah.
like to hear about that. All right, thank you. All right, next it looks like Ben is going to share on RE 483 Davis and Weber Counties Canal Company.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. So the Davis and Weber Counties Canal Companies coming before the board today. You guys have met them many times in the past. They are pursuing a project that is basically includes enclosing 2,600 feet of open concrete lined canal with a box culvert. The project is being pursued to make way for a project that UDOT is engaging in. They're actually moving I-15 eastward onto Hill Air Force Base, and Hill Air Force Base is exchanging land with I-15 to make way for the project. And then MIDA, which is the organization that UDOT's working with on the Air Force Base, is going to in turn exchange land with Davis and Weber Counties Canal Company for this project. So,
Ben,
so-
I know you're right in the middle, but could you just go through those exchanges one more time?
yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So I-15 currently is nestled right between Sunset, Utah and Hill Air Force Base. And UDOT is wanting to move I-15 eastward onto ground that is currently part of Hill Air Force Base. And there's an organization called MIDA, which is the Military Installation Development Authority. They are going to exchange land, which will be on the west side of I-15, with UDOT, so that they can move I-15 eastward.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you said it, but just to hear it again was helpful to get the order of
MIDA is
exchanges.
wanting to build a residential development on the land that they're receiving, where I-15 currently sits. And in order for that development to go in, they have to move the canal. And the canal is going to be moved to basically to make way for that. And they're going to enclose it in a box culvert. Oh.
There's a map.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
there'll
you.
be a map.
Oh, yeah, thank you,
when
thank you.
When we go
That's
through
great,
the
thanks, Ben.
slides, which kind of hopefully will make it a little bit more clear. So yeah, they're wanting to do about 2,600 feet of open concrete canal. They're potentially wanting to start this fall after the irrigation season concludes. However, the project may be delayed up to a year depending on UDOT's movements, because UDOT, there are certain sections of the pipeline that UDOT is going to be responsible for, because those pieces wouldn't need to be replaced except for the UDOT's project. So potentially beginning this fall, it's probably going to last 2 or 3 years, again, because there are sections that they have to wait for UDOT to complete before they can continue. I think that pretty well describes what's going on here. They are going to conserve approximately 1,450 acre-feet of water as part of the project. Yeah, I think that basically concludes my remarks.
All right, thank you. We'll go to questions and comments from the board. Maybe Kyle, I'd give you first if you have any, and then we'll go to the rest of the board.
I don't have any
Okay, thank you.
questions at this point.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the board on this one?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead, Charles. and then-
question for
yeah.
Ben. Now, they're moving that canal east, and they're going to put residential housing west of the canal, in
Right.
between I-15 and the canal?
So starting west, there will be the residential development, and then the canal, and then I-15 when they're complete. So the canal will be underground between the residential development, like in the parking lot of the residential development, between that and I-15.
Okay, just because I drive by it a number of times, I'm just trying to get it right in my mind.
Yeah.
Hard to visualize it.
Go ahead, Mike.
Madam Chair, so are they actually moving the canal or just covering the canal?
They will both. The canal will have a new realignment.
And if it were not for UDOT moving the road or MIDA wanting to develop the land, would they move the canal?
No.
Then
Right.
why is the canal company applying for the funds? I'm trying to understand the benefactor. It appears the benefactor is the land use authority that gets it afterwards, which would be MIDA, to
Right.
develop. And the
Right.
canal company is fine
Right.
the way they are.
So the canal company, you're right. The canal, it was completed, it was built in the 60s and 70s, so it's kind of old, but it certainly doesn't need to be replaced right now. And so you're absolutely correct. However, the canal company, they are engaging in a project where they're slowly enclosing sections of the canal. So they're happy to be able to get this section of the canal completed, completed as in enclosed in a culvert and not an opened canal anymore. However, MIDA is also contributing financially to the project. If you'll look at the cost breakdown, MIDA is contributing approximately 50% of the project costs, since, just to help basically cover the canal company's losses.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to be careful here to understand commitment of state funds to a state entity or two state entities, it benefiting UDOT and MIDA versus the canal company. So
Right.
in my mind, I'm not getting it all
So
straight.
we're actually committing money to the applicant, which is Davis and Weber County's canal company. So it's not directly going to the state, if that makes sense.
No, I understand
yeah.
that, but it appears the benefactor are two state agencies,
Okay.
more so than the canal company. The canal company likely wouldn't be doing this were it not for the two state agencies.
Right. You have something to say, Tom?
Tom's going to
Yeah,
clear
go-
me
yeah.
up here.
Go ahead.
Tom is the professional. He's been working with this applicant for
I've pulled the wool over your
forever.
eyes for 20 years, so it's a little bit longer. No, so there's a couple things I just wanted to bring up. Davis Weber County Canal Company has a master plan in which they're going to enclose all of the canal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this project will just move that section up a few years. So they're planning on doing it anyway. And MIDA, because they are receiving some benefit.
They're
because
paying for part of it.
They're paying for half of it.
Okay.
That's helpful.
That's a better
Yeah.
twist on it for
Do
me.
you have, I always say, like, I can get the numbers, I'm the economist, but I don't have the training to really understand the cost breakdowns. Just generally, for this project, what of the 7.5 million total, like how much would it cost to just do the enclosure? Like, do you have like just rough percentage of what it would be to just enclose versus actual
Where it is,
move?
where it's located
Yeah.
currently.
Just to kind of understand does that line up with that 50% just to could you help us understand those magnitudes? They don't have to be exact, but just to help understand the magnitudes. Is maybe this is like an economist, just like you can just grasp them from the air?
They're not moving it that much, but it would
Okay.
include additional excavation because you have to start from scratch,
Okay.
digging the alignment. But in the other sense, whatever they dig out, they can just put into the old alignment. So it won't be like they're having to haul material in and haul material out. It's just
Okay.
dig it, put it right
Yeah.
next to them. So I would say probably just a rough guesstimate would
Rough's
be
fine, yeah.
80%, 90%
Okay.
of the cost would be the original.
Okay,
Or what they'd have to do to enclose the original one.
That's helpful for some of my concerns. Yeah.
The new
Brian, yeah.
alignment is really very close to
Okay.
the old one. It's not far
Thank
at
you.
all.
All right, Brian?
Different question. We say that it's going to conserve approximately 1,450 acre feet. When we say conserve, are we talking about reduced depletions? Are we talking about reduced consumption? What is the?
We're
what's the
talking
definition of
about
conserve?
preventing percolation, like leaking of water through the existing concrete canal liner.
Okay.
And, potentially some evaporation, although that's probably negligible, but.
Okay.
So in reality, since the company has storage rights in Echo, whatever is saved would be
Yeah.
kept in Echo until it's needed in their service area, so.
Got it.
So is the 1,400 acre feet approximately, is that just for this section, or is that for the overall enclosure of their canal system, or is that just for this section of canal system?
It's just for this section.
It's pretty significant.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. Kyle, I assume you're okay making the motion on this one? Okay, excellent. All right, well, thanks, Ben and Tom, appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you for that explanation,
Very
Tom.
helpful,
I
yeah.
really appreciated that.
Very, very helpful. Okay, let's go on to committal of funds. Looks like we've got 4 projects with committal of funds. I don't know do we need to go through these? I never know exactly what we do. Okay, all right, well, let's go ahead and go through. So RM056 is, Ben, yeah, sorry, Ben, I gotta go back and relax, call you
that's
back
all right.
up here. Looks like this one is in Kyle's area as well. Go ahead and brief us, and then we can go to the board.
Of course. So the Centerville Dual Creek Irrigation Company, they are an ARPA grant recipient. and they are also a recipient of our small secondary metering grant. And they're using that money to install 2,300 roughly secondary water meters. And they have also applied for a loan, which the board has authorized, and they've jumped through all the necessary hoops and submitted all the paperwork necessary, and they're ready for committal if the board is willing to consider that.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board on this one? All right. I assume, will they be here? I know we don't need to necessarily hear from them.
They will not.
But
They're not required to attend today.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Ben. All right. Let's move over to the one that's in Charles area, RE480 West Cache Irrigation Company. Ethan.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the board. Yeah, this one, I won't spend too much time on. I think we just had that presentation last board meeting on kind of the updates.
Yeah.
But this is coming from the revolving construction fund. It was authorized in March at that board meeting in St. George, and so this is all the landslides. We had the large one that was due to liquefaction, and then the two smaller ones that are due to unstable slopes. And they have plans for the future to help mitigate being near some of that. But for now, this was just getting them funds to excavate that out and get them ready for irrigation season and get the water flow back down. If you remember, the landslides were up in Idaho, and so it blocked off all their shareholders. And so, this is just getting those funds so that they can get that cleared out, which I believe they're probably already done given the time of year and the kind of emergency nature of this. And so, I guess, just the cost sharing is $85.15, and with a total of $500,000, and that'll be 0% interest over 20 years. And so, any questions on that one?
Thank you. Just to validate, the committal is the same as the original authorization. This one we just did. This one. Okay, that's good. All right. Questions or comments from the board?
So 2 questions. One, has this work already been done then, and we're just refilling coffers, or how does that work?
We went up in April, and they were almost done, and so I haven't gotten. I don't know for sure that they're completely done, but I would imagine they are. Or very close.
What was the source of capital they used on that?
I don't know.
Oh no,
Can I just mention, especially for some of you that are newer, that the board knew about this, and we worked with Charlie. It was authorized knowing that they were starting the work at their own, what's the word, risk. Thank you. I was thinking of really big words that didn't make sense. And so, we still had to wait for all this paperwork to get done.
And I'm not calling it a question, that I just was curious.
Yeah, just be interesting,
Second question on that, and this is maybe more of a legal question, and my legal mind wants to know, is there a problem funding projects in Idaho?
Madam Chair, if I may respond, we've done quite a few projects in Franklin County, Idaho, because the majority of the water, although it is an Idaho water right and it's diverted in Idaho, it's primarily used by Utah residents.
Okay.
And I haven't been up to look at the actual project site, but I do know very well that water is flowing through their canals, and has been for quite some time now. And so I think they're quite satisfied. I don't know if they submitted any bills to you yet, Ethan.
No, I think we were waiting for this committal to take place before we could look at anything like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So again, when we get to this committal fund stage, we don't require the applicants to be here. That being said, I am kind of interested in this question that Brian's asked. I'm not sure that we necessarily have to do it on the record, or if you want to, perhaps you could give them a ring a call just to see?
They're planning on,
Okay.
they're, at least their secretary and then the engineer
Okay,
are planning on being
okay.
here, so.
All right.
Yeah, that could be worth.
All right.
asking
Well,
them.
why don't you just give them a heads up, and then we
Yeah.
can decide if we want to ask. Okay.
Yeah, and just to follow up a little more, Cub River Irrigation Company has borrowed a lot of funds from the division, and West Cache hasn't done as much, but they are, like I say, both Utah water users with Idaho water rights and diversion points in Idaho.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
you know, I would just touch on what Charles has mentioned. I don't think it's uncommon for us to help with funding in a different state as long as it's serving residents, farmland that's within the state of Utah, and I think it falls totally within criteria.
Great.
And Utah has better terms than Idaho has, so that's the whole reason this happens.
You're just not a good enough wheeler and dealer? Is that what you're saying, Charles?
Someone born and raised in Idaho, I'm just going to just not say anything. Glad to be in Utah. That's all. That's what I will say. All right. So Charles, I imagine you'll be okay making the motion on this one?
Yes, madam.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on over to, back south a little bit to RM 115 Davis and Weaver County's Canal Company. This looks like it's a meter loan. Tom is coming up.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the board, Davis Weber County's Canal Company will just be here for you to address the loan portion of the second round of their metering project. A few board meetings ago, the board authorized and committed ARPA grant funds of up to $5.12 million or so of grant for the second round. And these are just the loan funds that will match that. So they'll be addressing the committal of those funds.
Questions or comments from the board on this one?
Not a comment, I guess. I think Rick Smith will be here, and he'll be able to provide an update as to the number of meters that have been installed and a status report there.
Great.
Also, just a note, he texted me on the previous conversation on the previous project, and he'll also be here to help respond to some of those questions and help clarify that. But I think, Tom's explanation of it, being a part of a long-range project, that they would have been doing it at some future point in time anyway, helps address that question.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, so Kyle, you'll be okay with making the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then the last committal of funds is RM092. It's another meter loan. Monroe City, this is in Blaine's area. Brad?
All right, Madam Chair and the board. Yes, Monroe City is moving forward with metering, and just to recap, the purpose of this project is to purchase and install approximately 833 secondary meters and about 10 agricultural meters, and no grant funding will be used on the agricultural meters. And so, yeah, and just to mention that this will be the loan portion in the form of a bond, committal of funds. So that's staff's report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? All right. You okay with this one, Blaine?
Yeah,
All
this is
right.
pretty,
Yeah.
this is straightforward.
Yeah,
This
okay.
is just, it does have that little twist of, with the ARPA grant, they couldn't use it on their irrigation thing. So that's a little different twist, but the loan will cover the ag meters. So.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, and just so I know, again, they're not required to attend, but do you know if they will be?
No, they will not be.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Candace has all of this already documented. All right, thanks, Brad. And so now we can go ahead and move on to a couple of special items. We'll go ahead and start with RE484, Hates Creek Irrigation Company. Kyle, this is in your area, and Ethan's doing the presentation. Kyle, did you want to set this one up at all for us? Kyle's, or is Ethan's coming
I'll
up?
just make a comment. I appreciate the staff being forward-thinking, if you will, in looking at Hates Creek Irrigation Company's needs and the fact that some of their additional funding or projects could be covered under the Small System Secondary Meter Grant program. And so I compliment staff for, reaching out to them and trying to coordinate that.
Thank you. Great. Thanks, Ethan.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
No, thank you.
So, yeah, Hates Creek Irrigation Company, this, I believe was one of Tom's originally. The RM 012 was for the ARPA grant. They got the ARPA grant money back in August of '22, and that was originally to install 3,000 secondary meters. They have more than that, and so they're coming back for small system secondary meter grant, and to kind of increase some of the funds from the Conservation and Development Fund. So the purpose of this is to install all the 4,000 and those last 1,000, and so this is if you're unfamiliar, this is Kaysville, Fruit Heights up in Davis County. So yeah, they had the ARPA funds that at the time there's a limit of $5 million that we could give them from the ARPA grant, and so that's why they couldn't get enough to cover their full set of meters, and then that was for systems with 7,000 connections or less, and so now this small system secondary meter grant are state funds that are available to cities, towns, or secondary systems with fewer than 5,000 connections. And so, yeah, like I said, this will be to install the 1,000 secondary meters. And so the cost sharing kind of the $5 million will stay the same, and then they're looking to get just over $2 million, $2.22 million in the small system grant, and then increase the loan by $808,000, so that it'll be a total of $2.63 million, and then their share will go up a little bit as well. And so yeah, that's the gist of it for
Great.
installing some more secondary meters.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments?
So it looks like this one has two motions associated with it, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Kyle, you're okay making those two motions?
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go on to RL 582, Payson City. That's in Mike's area, and as Russell's coming up, Mike, is there anything you'd like to share before Russell does his presentation?
No, we'll go ahead and
Thank you.
let Russell present.
Okay, Payson City, we committed funds in 2018. It was a $10,570,000 project to redevelop an existing well and install several secondary transmission lines to correct some problems in the city and isolate an outdoor recreation complex, and they installed some secondary water meters. All the work was done, and it was about $2.2 million under budget for a change, yes. And as close as we can say is before COVID, things were much cheaper. They got lucky and got some really good bids. And they also coupled all these projects with other city projects while they were resurfacing most of the roads in Payson. They also were doing things like adding new culinary water lines, some buried pipelines, installing fiber optic lines and things like that. So a lot of projects were sharing the road excavation at the same time, so it came in a lot cheaper. So in 2019, with some of that leftover money, they came back and asked the board if they could use $700,000 of that to replace the Spring Lake pumps and the pump station. and install some additional amnion filters to their secondary system. And that work has been completed, and there's still $1.5 million remaining in the project funds. So they are coming back today to request to use those remaining funds to purchase and install new shutoff valves throughout the city. Some will be new, some are replacements for old worn-out valves. They'll be in sizes 4 to 16 inches. And a lot of the older valves have failed, leak, and are just inoperable. And there's also numerous lines that could benefit from additional shutoff valves. And so they're just going to be asking the board if they can use the remaining funds to install new valves. That is staff's report.
Great, thank you.
Do you know about how much the project's actually going to cost them? Is this going to cover the cost of the project?
Yes.
Or is this a portion of what they'll have to?
No, this will use all the money that remaining in the bond, so they're planning on using the entire $10,570,000 allocated for the project by the city.
You mean
the board.
10 million? 10 million. 10 million, Russell, not 10,000.
$10,570,000.
Any other questions or comments? Russell, do you recall what the interest rate was on these funds? Sorry to hit you out of kind of left field on that.
Gosh,
That's okay. I can follow up with you later. Just
I don't,
That's okay.
actually.
It's fine.
Oddly enough.
It doesn't weigh in on how I would vote, but just a point of curiosity. Seeing no other questions. Mike, I'm assuming you're okay to make the motion?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. All right, and then Russell will also be doing the presentation for RE450 Draper Irrigation Company. This is in my area. They've got a request for some additional funds. I haven't been super close on this one. Lean on Russell to share the details. I think it's, just related to some cost increases and then also how they're kind of planning to sequence their project. It's a big number, and so it'd be good for Russell to share with us what that increase looks like.
Okay, this is the opposite side of the coin, where this was bid recently after COVID when prices went through the roof.
Yes.
Okay, and the purpose of this project was to construct a new pump station, shallow groundwater wells and water lines to blend effluent from the Jordan Basin Water Reclamation Facility with shallow groundwater for use in the secondary irrigation system. Okay, after the project was authorized, the applicant decided to build the project in 3 phases. The total cost of the project was estimated at $22 million. And the board authorized $18.7 million, or 85% of the project, in July of 2021. The applicant will request committal of funds from the board for each phase as needed. And the 3 phases were to do the shallow wells and install about 10,000 feet of 24 to 30-inch pipeline in this first phase. The total estimated cost is $9,570,000, and there is a $2 million border reclamation drought resiliency grant that has been obtained for phase 1. Phase 2 will be to construct that reuse pump station on the Jordan Basin Reclamation Facility. And phase 3 will be to upgrade the Fort Street pump station. And funds were committed for phase 1 in 2023. Bids were recently opened, and the lowest bid was almost $4.3 million higher than originally estimated.
Yeah.
They didn't get too many bids. They got 3 bids, and they were all pretty high. Shallow well drilling is expected to bid at approximately $2.5 million, and they feel they've got some good estimates there that should be on the money. The total cost for phase 1 is now estimated to be $13,870,000. And the shallow wells are going to be bid at the end of June. So the cost estimate and sharing, We're showing that they are going to be requesting an additional $3,655,000 from the board, increasing the amount from $6,435,000 to $10,090,000. And staff recommends the board commit the additional $3,655,000 and amend the purchase agreement to state the board will provide 72.8% of the project of the Phase 1 costs up to $10,090,000, and the project be purchased at 1% interest over 25 years with annual payments of approximately $458,200. The applicant will be coming today to request a repayment period of 30 years. If the board agrees to that request, as suggested, the board commit the $3,655,000 and amend the purchase agreement to state the board will provide 72.8% of the Phase 1 costs up to $10,090,000, and the project be purchased at 1% interest over 30 years with annual payments of approximately $391,000. And I'd also like to mention that either one of these payments, they are going to be over the board's affordability guideline, and they were previously, so.
That's right. Can you give us an idea of what those amounts are for the payments, for the user payments?
Over about $105 for the 25 years, and something less, about $100 for the 30 years.
Okay. That's just kind of helpful because, again, this is, in my opinion, like a worthy project, but I'm also starting to realize that, well, not starting to realize, very much realize that these cost pressures are just going to continue to increase, and you know, we have limited funds available, and so you know that 5-year extension means that those monies won't be there for other things, and so kind of understanding the difference in the actual payments is helpful to me. I feel like it's relatively minimal, and so I'm leaning towards, again, we should let them make their case, but I'm leaning towards the 30 years. Or sorry, 25 years, the initial, leaning towards the 25 years, thank you.
And 25, is that what we initially did for the project?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the initial, and I think is consistent with how we normally do these projects. So I'm not sure that I'm convinced that 30 years really gets us much, and I'm not, you know, again, I'm not sure how much it gets them.
I worry about the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it's extending what we can do, but the project costs are also going up. So it's a double limit almost to what we get to do to help others. And so I want to be careful.
Exactly, and they're large numbers as well. Russell, and I know we've got other questions. On the Phase 2 and the Phase 3, I understand that they've got the grant that can be used for those pieces. Do you have magnitudes of what, if they were to, you know, what our participation or desired participation in those phases would be? Again, I know it's just completely, probably pretty ballpark at this point, but is it similar magnitudes to this amount, or is it?
Well, the Phase 3 is a smaller project.
Okay.
The Phase 2 is going to be big.
Okay.
That's going to be the majority of this, about another $10 million on Phase 2.
And I'll just note that 1% interest rate, again, I think that is a helpful rate. If they were to try to go and borrow this in the private market right now, it would be well above that 1%. So again, 25 years at that 1% should show a significant effort. I think there's other questions. Go ahead, Brian.
So 2 questions. How much water will they be pumping out of these shallow wells? Do we know?
Oh, boy. When we refurbished the well, I'm going to say it was at something 400 gallons a minute, maybe 600, 800 gallons a minute. Out of the new project, out of these new shallow wells. That's a good question for them. And
do we know how much increased depletion we're talking about here? And the reason I'm asking, to be very candid, is is part of my role on this is to think about Great Salt Lake issues. This is essentially on the shores of Great Salt Lake.
Yes.
And are we subsidizing a project that will actually increase depletion out of the Great Salt Lake?
I've discussed this with them, and I think you should discuss this with them as well. I don't want to speak on their behalf on this.
And listen, I know that I'm speaking out of both sides of my,
Well,
because that water that,
yeah,
I'm similarly concerned about
Yes.
actually lining the canal because we're taking water out of your aquifer at that point as well. So it's like,
Well, it's, you know, conservation depends on whose bucket you're taking it from.
totally agree. And this is
You
the
know.
question, right? And so this is not a criticism, I'm just trying to figure out where it is.
Well, Madam Chair, if I might, one of the other questions that I'm sure we all need to look at is the original repayment was $292,000 is what was anticipated. Is that correct? Yearly payment?
that is correct.
And now you're looking at either $458,000 or $391,000. So in all fairness to them, I mean, we need to take that into consideration as well, because even at the lower payment, you're $100,000 more than they anticipated and tried to fund their project for. So I think, I'm usually a stickler to say, let's hold to the 25-year, but when you look at the actual increase in the cost to this entity, I mean, it is substantial. You know, I mean, you're almost double, well, you're half again on the one and $100,000 more on the other. And so I guess in that respect, if I was in their shoes trying to fund this, I mean, it makes it extremely difficult to go that type of a change, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that. I'm a little confused. I think you said it would be about $105.
Yeah, so when
hit
we
to the-
divide it over the shareholders, or
Yeah.
what does that
And
mean?
Divided
with-
over the city.
At the one, but it was not a significant difference going the 5-year difference, which was a little contrary to almost doubling the payback amount.
Well, it's, you know, I mean, you're going from 292,000 was the anticipated repayment.
No, I understand, but the user was only paying another $5 to $10 a month, and
I
that
think
was less significant to me than what you just
Yeah.
said.
Right.
That's more significant.
perhaps I can explain it how I understand it, and then Russell can confirm or set me straight. So there's a couple of things going on. There's the major cost escalation that happened between when this was initially authorized and when it's being put into place. And so that's where that large jump from 6.4 million to 10.9 million happens. And that's going to push up the per user the total and the per user cost a significant amount. Then when we think about in this new place we are, in the new cost structure, we're talking about 25 years versus 30 years. And I believe that that's where the differential that you're talking about is coming from. The jump from, let's see, the 3.7 million to the 4.6 million. Because you've got to remember that this is divided over quite a few. I mean, they pass the cost on to quite a few individuals, but first of all, am I understanding kind of at least the concept correctly? And then second of all, perhaps Russell, as we come into the full meeting, if we can nail down what those monthly bills look like in the different cases. So the initial monthly bill, what the monthly bill looks like under 25 years, and what the monthly bill looks like under 30 years. I think that will help help to clarify things.
These are just some rough numbers
Yeah.
I looked at,
Great.
punched in on my calculator
Great.
while I was doing the report, and
Great.
it was roughly
Yeah.
about $5.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments, other questions or comments? I won't make the motion. Mike, do you mind making a motion on this one?
which motion do you
Well,
want
I
me
will
to
say, I
make?
will, I'll state my preference. I mean, again, if the numbers, again, we're deliberating on, well, I mean, I'm not sure that we can do much difference on what our, like, the cost sharing is, but as I'm
I mean,
thinking
we have
about the
this-
decision between 25 years versus 30 years, and it's just in that piece, my preference is the 25 years. Because again, I want to acknowledge these are significant cost increases, and we don't want to place additional burden where we don't need to place it. But when we start to talk about large dollars being tied up for that additional 5 years, that's what and that's actually could be shared over a large number of individual users making the repayments. Essentially, I'm just trying to balance like what's available for other projects. So my preference is the staff's recommendation with this in my area, but that's not to say if anyone else feels differently and
Well,
would like to, go ahead with 30 years, then I
I'm
think they should
comfortable
be.
making the staff recommendation. I'm a little uncomfortable
Yeah.
making the applicant recommendation.
Okay.
And Shalane just,
Yeah, go
brought
ahead.
up the original.
Oh, thank you.
If I can provide a little additional
Great, thank
background
you.
for board members who might not have been around when this was initially authorized. The original feasibility report was taking into consider the entire project, right? Not just phase one.
Oh, that's right.
And at that time, the financial and economic feasibility took into consideration there were 8,300 culinary connections, that the entire project, the board share of the entire project would be about $852 per month per connection. So the feasibility report stated that the applicant was already planning to raise their rates about $10 per month per connection to be able to cover the costs of the entire project. So even with the increase in costs of phase one, while it's significant for phase one, and we don't know what's going to happen for phase two and phase three, it is 8,300 connections, and we still are well within this with the 25-year repayment. So there may need to be considerations taken when we move to phase two and phase three, and maybe at that time the board may want to extend more grace, extend the repayments to allow the applicant a little more flexibility. But from what was presented at the original authorization and the committal of funds, I don't think it's unreasonable to stick with the 25 years for this, even though it does significantly increase their repayment amount, spread over the cost of 8,300 connections. It's not huge.
Questions or comments? Well, I'll ask Mike to make the motion, but of course, if there's any, substitute motions or, amendments to the motion, we can definitely work through those. And it will be good, and it will be good to hear from the applicant too, right? That might reinforce
I like
another.
that discussion, though,
Yeah.
that because of the other two phases, that might be a consideration. Because I think in the original project, there was a consideration to go to 25 versus what
That's right,
was
yeah.
originally looked at.
Yes,
And
yeah.
so that bump's already been
Extension
made.
of-
So if this would work within the bounds of what we're looking at, and then perhaps at the futures, we look at those separately, and if we need to look at those, then we look at those.
Okay. All right.
Right, and if I could, Madam Chair,
Yes,
just
please.
also, the question came up about grant funding for the future
Yes.
phases.
Oh, yeah,
That
yeah.
that original feasibility did state that, or maybe it was the committal of funds on phase
Okay.
one, did state that they are seeking $5 million in additional grant funds for phases two and three. They got $2 million for phase one. They are seeking additional for phase two and three, but we don't know what that is yet.
Actually, they did get
Oh,
granted.
did they?
Yes, they got
Okay.
granted the
Oh,
$5
dang, I thought for a
million.
minute maybe they had an additional 5 million, which would bring them to 10. Okay, but, okay, so
No,
they do
got-
have the 5, okay.
Yes, they secured the $5 million
Okay.
for
Okay.
phase two and three.
Okay,
Okay.
so that was, what was referenced has been obtained. Okay,
Okay,
all right. Well,
great.
thank you very much on this one. Let's go ahead and move on to a couple of ARPA funds conversions, and I understand that Marisa is going to do the briefing on these with Ani. Is that, or Ani's going to do the briefing with Marisa? Okay, all right. Well, maybe we'll let, and it looks like these are all in Charles's area.
Unfortunately.
So maybe, is it okay if we just let Marisa jump in? Does that work for you, Charles?
You bet.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I thought Charlie wanted to explain the legislative changes and.
No.
So these next three are about converting ARPA funds. And in Utah Code 73-10-34, that has a lot of the information about, that's where the requirement to meter is. And it talks about our small system fund and some and many other things, including potential exemptions from metering. Those are in 73-10-34. 34.5, 73-10-34.5, subsection 8 reads, and I love the word notwithstanding now, says notwithstanding the other provisions of this section, notwithstanding the other provisions of this section, the board may issue a grant to or convert a grant previously issued to a secondary water supplier described in subsection 73-10-34, 13A. And subsection 13 in the other code discusses 3 potential exemption options that go through the Division of Water Rights. The state engineer has to approve or not approve of those potential exemptions. So that's what that's referring to. So back to this, a grant previously issued to a secondary water supplier described in subsection 73-10-34, 13A, who seeks to meter its strategic points under subsection 73-10-34, 13, from money appropriated under this section to fund a project that is an alternative to metering, such as lining ditches or improving head gates, if the secondary water supplier establishes to the satisfaction of the board that the alternative project will conserve more water than is expected to be conserved through metering. And so we've got these 3 projects, and one of the very first things that had to be done is they had to be approved for this strategic metering, which means not having to meter at each end user. So they've got the strategic metering that that they do have to do. ARPA funds does not cover that, cannot be converted to cover that because those strategic meters are not going to conserve more water than metering at every end user. But they have come to us with, these 3 applicants have come to us with different projects, alternative projects, and they had to show, they send paperwork to show that how they came up with it conserving more water than metering. We have information on the applications that were sent in about how much water they expected to conserve originally. So we have some backup on that. And the reason I'm heavily involved in this is because we'd never done this before. They keep saying, what is it you want to see? And I'm like, I don't know, because we haven't done this, but I equated it to a Water Smart grant when they come up with calculations for how much water is going to be saved. And so that's what's going on here. And we're trying, so as a staff, we have come up with recommendations. All 3 of them are very different, our recommendations. And then we're leaving it to the board to decide. We're letting you know how much will be conserved. And one of them, including Hiram City, has 2 standalone projects you can see on this map that Ani will talk about. And I had a lot of discussion with their engineer. I had a lot of discussion with their engineer, Dan Woodbury. I said, those sound like 2 standalone projects. And this was doing it without any paperwork in front of me. And I said, I think those need to be considered separately because, as you'll see, have you seen in the report, Nani will talk about, one of them doesn't show that it'll conserve any water, the standalone project. So I think with that, I can turn it over to Ani. Yeah.
Anyone have any questions
sorry.
about, well, just any questions just generally
About the
about
code.
process and,
Yeah.
okay. All right, thanks, Marisa.
All right.
Okay, Ani, go ahead and please take us through these. We'll start with Hiram City, which is RM008.
Okay, so I'm not going to read through the whole report, but I have some notes scratched down here. So originally, Hiram City had come to the board for secondary meters. The board authorized and committed $5 million for 2,300 secondary meters to be purchased and installed. With that, they would have conserved, on their application, they stated they would conserve about 345 acre feet per year with the metering. So they were granted exemption, and they've proposed two projects. Project A would basically they have 4 and 6 inch pipes that leave the water reclamation facility, and currently they can only push about 1,000 gallons per minute through those pipes. They don't dare to go any higher. And they're proposing to replace those pipes with a 20-inch PVC pipe, 11,000 linear feet of pipe so they could realize their full potential of 3,000 gallons per minute. That 11,000 linear foot pipe would intersect with two 14-inch pipes, and that would deliver their secondary water through the system. With this project, they would not see any water conservation, but it would allow them to realize their full capacity. Because they will not see conservation, we don't recommend using ARPA funds for this project, although we think it's a good project. In the future, they could come to the board for a loan. But their Project B will conserve some water. They're talking about lining and piping a significant portion of the Hiram Canal. It would be a 740-foot linear feet of concrete lined canal. It would be 12.5 feet wide, 5 feet tall, concrete walls with 1 foot freeboard. And this would align with a small piece of canal that already exists right at the reservoir. And then they would, from the canal, the open canal, they would pipe an additional 4,200 linear feet. And that would be parallel Highway 165, and that would be a 54-inch pipe. And they would plan to conserve about 330 acre feet due to seepage and the deterioration. And even though they're conserving less water, just a little bit less water, it's more cost effective since it's a much less expensive project. So the staff recommends that the board allow the applicant to convert a portion of the ARPA grant funds to line and pipe about 4,900 feet of open canal, and that the contract be amended to state the board will provide 70% of the project cost up to $1,801,000, and that the remaining $3,199,000 will be returned to the board. So that's staff's report on that.
Thanks, Ani. Questions or comments from the board on this one?
Well, it's just what Ani was saying.
Yeah.
The biggest part of what they're requesting is an ordinary canal improvement project that would work under existing loan funds or support.
Yeah.
And it doesn't conserve enough water to justify it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
part of the request doesn't qualify.
This might be a Marisa Shalane question, and you basically stated this, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. I mean, the board has like a little bit of discretion here in interpreting what that means, but I just want to be clear, like if we take this analysis as given, just restating what's been stated, if we're taking this analysis as given, we really can't approve. Project A. Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, and Charlie, I wasn't sure which one you were talking about when you said a regular canal project. Are you talking enclosing or lining the Project B that'll conserve water, or are you talking Project A of increasing the capacity?
Project A.
Okay.
Does
Sorry,
not.
I thought you were talking about the concrete.
No,
Yeah.
I got them turned.
Yeah. And I did, and this is why I asked their engineer, I said, I think these need to be standalone,
Yeah.
because if you're just trying to put them together to get the full amount of money, you could lose the possibility of all of it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't comply, if it's not to the satisfaction of the board, I said, I think it's better to separate it. And as Ani said, for Project B, even though they conserve less based on their calculations, which I appreciate the honesty, you know, these are all kind of up in the air, trying to use data from the past of how things work, even how much water secondary meters will conserve. Candace talked about the idea of looking and saying, but if they're spending less ARPA funds to realize that conservation, that almost the same conservation, could we look at it from a cost effective? And that's what's on that table above the modification of terms, showing the Project B, which staff is recommending, versus installing secondary meters and the cost of that.
So I have a question. What happens with the money that is returned?
That's what, can you remind us how?
And, and we will get into that more with our withdrawals, when we talk about the withdrawals, because it is money that will be returned back to the board that then can be reallocated in the very short amount of time that we have left to get them under contract.
Is there, and that's the thing, so is there demand for the
new applicants? Not so much. Existing, yes. Existing applicants, yes.
Okay.
And one thing that happened at the legislature when they were starting to once again change some of the code in March of last year, was it looked like we were going to get $20 to $30 million back, possibly $30 million based on some of the changes that didn't take effect fully. That didn't happen, but we asked for them to raise the $5 million for smaller systems and the $10 million for the larger systems in the ARPA limits.
Okay.
Because remember, they cut those off. That's why you see on the, for Hiram here, they only had 69.5% because $5 million was their cap. They could only get $5 million worth of ARPA funds. So those that have maxed out from the previous limits, the limits have now been changed to 10 and 20 million.
Okay.
So there is, with that idea that we were concerned, can we flip this in the amount of time left? Because although the ARPA funds, a reminder, ARPA funds, they have till the end of 2026 to spend them. They have to be under contract by the end of this year, which requires board motions and contract time.
I have to ask this question, again, just given my maybe limited knowledge in this area, and I completely respect the expertise of our staff, and this analysis makes sense to me. But just to understand kind of the alternatives out there, other than kind of pushing these projects together to maybe meet some criteria for qualification, is there any way else to interpret that Project A is, like, maybe it's outside of your professional comfort with interpreting it as qualifying, but is there any?
You can put the two together.
Outside of that.
And just
outside
say
of that,
conserves the same amount as the other standalone project.
Okay.
We were uncomfortable with that when it comes to the code.
Okay. But outside of that, is there anything that?
They can come to us for a loan.
Yeah.
But it's ARPA funds.
Okay.
And we're being
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I had to ask that question. For me, it's probably obvious for you all, but just wanted to make sure there's nothing else standing out.
We are already, we've been working.
All right, Kyle, thank you.
Well, I just have a question. Are the applicants aware that the board, this is the recommendation and the discussion of that you've had with them, that this is the recommendation that?
I sent them the report, and I didn't hear any feedback, so.
And I think, is Todd Perkins on though?
Yes, Todd Perkins will be here.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have the opportunity to ask them some questions, I think, to understand.
So we don't know what their reception to what your recommendation is?
Not right now.
Okay.
They didn't fight back.
When I talked to Dan Woodbury, that was weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that's their engineer, not them. But it was their engineer that called me and said, how do we do this? And I, again, it was without anything in front of me. And I said, that other project just sounds like increasing usage.
Yeah.
not conserving.
Yeah, I mean, if they
And-
don't qualify, they don't qualify. That's what I'm trying to like wrap my head around. Is there some way to like help, like, for them to qualify outside of mixing them together? And it really, I'm not sure that we really have a choice here, but.
We're being very careful with these ARPA funds, even making them available for secondary use rather than drinking water was something that Candace and Tim Davis back in the day had to go through with AGs and
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes, please go ahead, Randy. Yeah.
You know, based on the criteria of the ARPA funds, I don't see how staff could recommend anything different on Project A. I mean, it's pretty cut and dried as far as I can see. I mean, it's an increase of water volume. It's not a savings in any way, shape, or form. Yes, does it allow them to utilize their treatment plant more fully? Yes, it does, but it doesn't conserve any water. So I would totally agree with what staff has recommended there. And then it makes sense to me on, yeah, it's 330 acre feet compared to 345, but when you look at cost per acre foot, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I mean, if we want our dollars to be spent in a more efficient manner, I think we would be foolish as a board not to support when you're talking a third of the cost compared to the other and still very, you know, almost as much conservation. So that's my two bits.
Great. Thanks, Randy.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
if I
go ahead,
might.
please.
And I would just mention, and we can talk about this a little bit later as well as we get into the withdrawals, is we are looking for direction from the board on how to approach getting these funds that have been are being returned to the board out again. Do you just want us to contact those who had previously hit their cap or previous applications where we didn't fulfill their request because of our limited funding? Do you want us to go out for a new application period? You know, did we miss anyone? That's always a question I have. I know there are concerns of the timing, the limited time we have left, and we are under a tight deadline, and we're getting questions from the governor's office on what is our plan to get these all contracted by the end of 2024. But I would just offer up that we are looking for guidance from the board. So if you guys have any thoughts or concerns as we get into the withdrawal portion, that's, I would say, we're looking for.
Thank you.
Madam
Right.
Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
I guess in response to your question, I would make the comment that I don't think you've got time to go out for another complete round and go through the process.
No.
I think you have to run with what you've already got, and you need to look at where the shortfalls are based on the legislation and then find a way to address it. I don't think you have the time to go out the other direction that's my personal opinion.
Thank you. Sounds like I think we should all think through that, but it sounds like we're more or less in agreement, and we can come back to that. Will you need a formal motion for direction on that? I'd ask Randy to make it
I
if
don't
you need
think
it.
so. I
Okay.
think we would just take the direction of the
Okay.
board
Okay.
and reach out to those
Okay.
applicants
Great. All
if that's how the board felt.
So do we need to do that during the board meeting or here?
I think we're good with just from
Okay.
the briefing meeting to discuss how
Okay.
we're going to handle that.
Well, let's come back to that and reaffirm it, but I think that it sounds like Randy's articulated
Madam Chair, if I may.
the desire generally. Yes, go
Because I'm
ahead.
afraid I'll totally forget this in
Yes,
a few
that's fine,
minutes, and
yeah.
it's going to be 20
Yeah.
minutes.
Thanks, Ani,
before
for
we talk.
hanging with us up here.
See, I've already kind of lost my train of thought now. Those funds will still have to come back to the board to be,
I think we'll
to have motions on them,
Yeah.
whether they're new applicants or whether they're existing applicants. And I will say there is one company that I know of that we have loaned money, and they are interested in knowing about the grant money.
Okay.
And so that there is,
Great.
but it's not going to be the full 27 million.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Marisa. Charles, are you okay making the motion on this one? And I assume you would make the motion on the staff recommendation unless we hear something convincing.
No, just the first motion. It's my intention to make the motion on the second to the last paragraph, which
Okay.
involves Project B.
Okay.
And not the latter one.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next one, which is Johnson Park Pipeline Company. Ani.
Okay, so Johnson Park Pipeline Company originally was authorized by the board in August of 2022 to purchase and install 76 secondary meters. This would have conserved 44.5 acre feet per year. They have been granted an exemption, and now they would like to, instead of metering, replace 4,700 feet of deteriorating pipeline. The pipes are old and leaking, and they actually did a little experiment and figured that they would conserve about 152.8 acre feet per year, which is about 3 times as much. They've already started replacing pipes. You can see the red is what they are proposing. And all the other colors are different phases of their pipe replacement. So it's pretty straightforward. So the staff recommends the board allow the applicant to convert the ARPA grant funds to install about 4,700 feet of pipeline and commit 70% of the eligible costs up to $114,800.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments? Charles, do you have any insight you'd like to share on this one?
No, I have no insight,
Okay.
but I am prepared to make that
Okay,
motion,
great.
Madam
All right,
Chair.
Charles will make the motion. Are there any other questions or comments? This one seems pretty in line with the intent of, or with not the intent, with the actual statute. All right, let's move on to Paradise Irrigation Company. And
Madam Chair,
Yes.
before you do
Go
that, I
ahead. Yeah,
do
Kyle,
have a
thank you.
question
Yes.
relative to Marisa sharing the legislative language with us.
That's helpful, yeah.
Says, references seeks to meter at strategic points. So are all of these projects going to have some type of a meter? These 3 metering system at some point, and is that identified?
Yes.
Who and where they'll do that?
That is through the Division of Water Rights, and part of getting approval was showing where those strategic locations would go. So we have, and that's up to the Division of Water Rights to work with them on that. My understanding is, I don't know about these 3 that were doing the funding, but a lot of those that were withdrawing that sought exemption and to do the strategic metering, some of them already have a source meter at the top and something at the bottom, and that was enough for the Division of Water Rights, and something like that was approved. So, yeah, in some systems, it's just a top and a bottom meter, just depending on what they went through with the Division of Water Rights. There were 3 other options of exemptions in subsection 8 that go through the Division of Water Resources. 1 came through us. All the rest went through the subsection 13 through the Division of Water Rights. And so, and working a lot with water rights, and I just want to say this, very appreciative of them, because for them in their code, they didn't have to worry about this till January 1st of 2030, because that's when you either have to be exempt or fully metered. So we got to tell them, well, yeah, but we need you to figure this out now for some of these. So there's been a lot of work between our secondary metering staff and the Division of Water Rights to get these that have funding, get these figured out faster.
So that perhaps brings up another question. What happens if we approve and they don't?
We approve.
We approve their conversion.
Oh, they had to be approved before we would consider it. Okay. All 3 of these been approved. Okay. That was a requirement that by May 17th, we had to have that. Great. So that was part of our form that we had and all the requirements. Great. So, yeah.
Thanks for that clarification, putting that on the record. Yeah. Let's take a look at Paradise Irrigation Company. Marisa, are you talking us through this one?
One
okay,
is
great.
mine. And I am going to say about Johnson Park, this is the one that I least thought would make it because they had a lot of work they had to do, and Greg Nelson, their president, did a great job, and they thought that the project originally would not cost more than the metering. But they hadn't hired an engineer yet. And as you see, Steve Wood, Sunrise, tripled the cost. And we were concerned about whether or not they, wanted to do that. And they said, we want to do this no matter what. We need this done. So they did a great job. They had a lot of work to get done, and they did it. So this is Paradise Irrigation Company. Paradise Irrigation Company. Wow, I haven't read back to what it was before. Paradise Irrigation originally requested funding for 640 secondary water meters. Okay, 640 meters. They've gone through the exemption process with the Division of Water Rights. They've been approved to do strategic metering at strategic locations. And so we know they've been approved. And so this drastically changes the cost, where now they're looking to convert it for a project to install 3 meters and vaults. And these are larger meters. And so on this project, as you see, there'd be, it's only $150,500, the cost share. And so we would be at 70% at just $105,350. And I apologize, my head doesn't have everything about this one. So based on the original, and this one's a lot different than Hiram when you do the cost effectiveness. Based on the applicant's original application installing, it's supposed to be 640 meters. I thought I fixed that one. We thought they'd conserve about 379.5 acre feet. And so they went through an analysis that with these meters and vaults, they would end up conserving only 76 acre feet. However, you can see the comparison table there at the bottom of that page showing the difference in cost per acre foot based on how much they'll conserve and how much money it will cost. There are some concerns that staff has about the situation with Paradise. There's requirements to get done, and some of those are still not done. I've explained, they're explained in the report, and also we wanted to show kind of the timeline of the staff's efforts to try to get things moving and completed by May 17th. And so there's still requirements that need to be done. And so we are asking to have part of the motion state that all of these requirements must be completed by July 15th of 2024, or all of the funds will be withdrawn from further consideration, because we're running out of time. And staff has tried really hard to help them know what their requirements are. And hardly any communication coming back at us until the day after we finalize the report. So our original recommendation was to withdraw it completely, and then they got some information to us. But their business license is still expired. I checked this morning, and I advised them of that in April. So we can't contract with them if they don't have an active business license with the state of Utah.
If we were to withdraw completely, again, I know that's not staff's recommendation, but if the board were to lean into withdrawing completely, could they reapply with the next?
For ARPA funds, they don't want to do secondary meters. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah, and just be in the same place?
Once we withdraw it, they don't have it.
I would kind of think of it. I guess I'm leaning towards giving them a little grace, because, technically they could kind of come back. We're going to push out funds again, and so I don't know. It's not a ton of money, but go ahead,
Madam
Candace.
Chair, if I might, I would say that this is specific to the ability to convert existing funds that have been authorized and committed.
Yes.
So they wouldn't be able to come back and apply for these grant funds under a different sort of application period. They did, after we had many back and forth conversations between Marisa and I. They did finally reach back out to us and said and gave us a status update on the things they were working on. Marisa did indicate that this would be in the motion, that we need these things to be done by July 15th, to give them kind of a hard deadline to get it done.
Even though May 17th was a hard deadline.
So in essence, if they don't comply, we have withdrawn it.
And they are telling me they don't think they can get it done by July 15th.
And maybe we should talk, they'll be here, right? So we can maybe ask
They'll
them
be online.
about what can help us to understand if they don't get the information to us by July 15th, if they get it to us by August 15th, what does that mean in terms of?
Getting it on the August board meeting?
Yeah.
We're trying to do it ahead of time, so we have the August board meeting to get all the withdrawn funds back out. Yeah,
So
because
we're risking, the longer they take, we're risking $105,000 that could be deployed in other places, essentially, is kind of the.
And it's not much.
Yeah, it's not much, but it is, I mean, that's what, I'm just trying to figure out how, for me, how aggressive to be and.
Where my.
And if it goes, I guess what I'm hearing is if it goes much past July 15th, that hinders our ability to redeploy those funds if we need to. That's what I just.
Yes,
is that okay?
because we're hoping on, by July 15th, to know the number that we now, so that we can start reallocating those funds. Because then motions have to be done in a board meeting, contracts have to be written and sent out, and it just, everything is time. And if I may.
Yeah.
The funds were authorized for them in August of 2022. And I started having discussions with them in July of 2023 about needing to file for exemption if they wanted to convert funds. And, yeah.
I would say, Madam Chair, there were, in July of 2023, under the current statute, they were not eligible, is my understanding, for exemption.
In July of 2023, they were.
They were?
As of that.
It
I
was
don't even know if they
Hiram that
needed the new
wasn't
legislation. There was new legislation in March that passed.
Yeah, so with the legislation that occurred in this last legislative session, it broadened the door, opened the door wider for additional exemptions. And I would have to look back a little bit more closely. Marisa is probably
I'm not
spot on
sure
that
if
they
they
may
needed
have been
that change.
eligible for an exemption in last year, but there were additional changes. So that's why we also saw additional people go exempt.
And that took effect May 1st. And in July, we were just barely starting conversations about how to do this, so.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles, and then Spencer. Yes, thank you.
You know, for me, from my experience operating a small irrigation company, I feel like there's no excuse for them to not get their corporate status up to date. I mean, I've had to do that kind of work too, and it's not that big a hurdle. And the other observation I have is regarding the funding is, I look at it as initial funding versus additional funding for how to define the difference between reallocating a new round versus adding supplemental money to an organization.
Thank you. Thank you, Spencer.
Yeah, so kind of what Charles brought up, I was just curious when you had said that their business license expired. Is that with the Department of Commerce, like their entity? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
As of September of last year.
Okay. So really, I mean, after.
Which I advised them in April, sorry.
Yeah, my understanding is, I mean, after 2 years, they're almost 1 year expired. After 2 years, it's really hard to even go back and capture that entity again and reinstate it.
Okay.
And so, I mean, 2 years is a long time, you know, for people to do that. So I just kind of share in that same concern with Charles of if they're struggling with keeping their entity up to date, especially if it's been brought to their attention of just, you know, how good are they going to be of repayment? So.
Well, and if I may, Madam Chair, there's not a repayment on this, but they did have an active business license when this started because we went through and checked every single application. It's one of the first things we do. I don't even remember how I decided to look at it one day in April, but I did and saw that it had been expired since last September. And so that's when I advised them of that.
Well, I don't think
and
we can have a contract with an entity
We
that
can't.
doesn't exist.
That's why we've let them know. And the other difficult part for us as a staff is a lot of, mostly lack of all communication back to us. Since April.
Okay.
And so, with continued emails and continued.
Well, and it goes back to, I guess I would I'll speak maybe for the board. That's a real problem, I think, for our staff, not to have the communication with our staff. It's a respect issue. But then on top of it, we just can't do our job as a board if you don't have that information too. So I'm concerned about just, lack of communication. And then at the end of the day, it goes back to, we can't confirm that they qualify without these pieces of information. We can't approve
Well, and
without
this is
those things, so.
reauthorization. We'd have to come back for committal.
Yeah.
And the idea is if they get things done by July 15th, we could commit funds in August.
Okay. With that, Charles, are you good making this motion as written then, or?
Yes.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
okay.
I will read it as written.
Okay.
Take it as written.
Okay, thank you. And of course, we'll hear from them. And so if there's, something that sways anyone on this board a different way to making an alternate recommendation, of course, we should consider that. But we appreciate the work on this. Okay, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and, I know I do feel like the time we put in here makes for a very efficient meeting in the afternoon. Acknowledging that, while also acknowledging that we are starting to run a little short on time, let's go ahead and move into those withdrawals. And Maurice, are you just going to present as, okay. Okay. Oh, thank you.
I try to go paperless. Why hardly ever carry a pen?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Marisa, we need you to turn your mic on, please.
Well, that's important. Thank you, Carmen. There are 23 reports in the board packet of entities that either released funds or didn't respond to us by May 17th, which is the deadline the board sent. There are 7 that did not return a form at all, and you can see this release form right here, whether or not they returned that. I'm going to see if I can get a little bit bigger. So there's 7 that did not. Several of those 7, at least 5, we had confirmation over phone calls, emails, and I think mostly phone calls. And we've got that in the body of the withdrawal report, that they said, yeah, we're gonna release the funds back. Send us the release form, and then we still didn't get the release form. And part of the motion of the board of May 17th was you either need to respond or funds are going to be withdrawn. And so that's where those 7 came in, and that did not send a release form. They did not respond by May 17th. And going back and looking through it, Candace asked about whether or not, and again, all of these that did not send in a release form fall under subsection 13 through the Division of Water Rights. And as you can see, some of them, Horseshoe Irrigation has not even applied for exemption, and that's fine. They don't have to be fully metered or be exempt until January 1st of 2030. So that is something they don't have to do to release the funds. None of these did. But they waited until they got to see if they'd get approved or not, the majority of these. This one was a project that did not qualify. We learned much later, as the Special Service District itself is not a water supplier. It's a conglomerate of companies, and they can't file for exemption for all of them. 2 of these have applied to water rights, Birch Creek and Leeds, and I looked up and found the letter that said that the Division was asking, of Water Rights was asking for additional information and have not received any. So that's that list we've got here, showing that either they yes or no signed the release form and whether or not they've been approved for the strategic metering. And that totals $19,544,600 coming back. Now, we've got these 3 that are asking to convert funds, originally just over $7 million, potentially returning $5 million if the board, these are what is recommended, the recommended amounts from the staff. And then just so you know, we've got 3 other projects that total $6 million. North Park hired an engineer, got a contract, send in for reimbursement, then got approved for exemption in one of the newer options to get approved. And so a little bit of money's been spent there, and so we don't do a withdrawal, we do a closeout internally. So we're looking for $241,000 to come back. They did sign a thing to release funds. Linden City and Highland City, both are under contract, both are installing meters. Linden City's done and under budget, which is a concern that I have about this idea of getting money back because you're under budget and getting it under contract. So that was under budget, and Highland City is projecting that they're going to be under budget. Right now, I don't have exactly those numbers. I've got this number of $670,000. And Ethan, I put an asterisk there that needs to be verified. But I don't know that amount's going to be known. Is it higher? Will they know before the end of 2024? Okay. So that's some of the concerns we have, is if they're returning funds and then they're not under contract anymore. And then January 1st, 2025 comes along and you're supposed to be under contract already. So those are some of the fun things we're trying to figure out ahead of time. So that totals $30 million. I did get my $30 million back. Okay.
Marisa, could you go through, just so we can have it in one place? I know you've got it popped up, but my eyes are kind of blurry. Those projects that have not returned a release form, you said there's 7 of them. You said that sounds like you've had conversations with 5, sounds like there's 2 that are we just don't have any sort of, can you just read through which those are really quick?
Irrigation. Okay. That one, Ethan and I had several conversations on the phone with them.
Great.
They were leaning towards releasing the funds because they're also trying to get a Water Smart grant. And we said, we can't wait around for you to find out your Water Smart grant because, but then they stopped answering our calls.
Okay.
And then Nephi Irrigation did not have an engineer even hired by May 17th, which was a requirement.
Okay.
That they had several notifications about having to do that.
Okay.
And they said, we'll sign the release form, send it to us. They never sent it back.
Okay.
Oh, Center Creek. Center Creek, thank you.
Okay.
No, it was Center Creek. Okay, Center Creek. Center Creek, their engineer said, I don't think they're going to do it. And we emailed and called and emailed and called, and no one ever answered.
Okay.
So by May 17th, the engineer reached out to them. By May 17th, they just hadn't responded to us at all.
Okay.
But it sounds like they aren't going to meet her for whatever reason.
So, okay. Wait, so I've got 17th North Water users.
Oh, so all the ones that never signed a release form?
Yeah, if you could you tell us the 7
Sorry,
that have
okay.
not sent, the 7 that haven't sent a release form, and then.
Okay.
I guess what are the two that we really haven't heard from? That's why I just wanted to have note
The
of those.
two we haven't heard back from was RM032 Horseshoe Irrigation.
Okay.
And RM079 Center Creek. We
Okay,
haven't heard
perfect.
from the applicant on that, but
Okay.
I've heard from the engineer.
Okay.
Saying I don't think they're going to, and him trying to reach out to them as well.
Okay.
So those are the two that
We
didn't
really
say
don't- okay.
anything. And then go back up here to RM041 Liberty Irrigation.
Okay.
They asked to have a form sent to them. I sent a form to them. They did not respond with it. I talked to them on the phone. Nephi Irrigation, they submitted stuff May 17th, and we're missing everything, including hiring a lot of things, including not hiring an engineer.
Okay.
So they said, we're just going to release the funds, send us a form. They didn't send it back.
Okay.
17th North, is that Ben? Well, my project managers weren't involved so much in trying to get the forms because it was just a lot. And I don't have that one. I'm pretty sure 17th North also asked. I don't have that report open right now.
Okay.
And asked for the form, or we just sent the form and never heard back.
Okay.
Center Creek, we've discussed. Penguich City, many discussions on the phone with their city engineer, city manager. They weren't going to use the funds. They were approved to be exempt, and they said to send them a form. They never sent it back.
Okay.
Minersville, same thing. I talked to him the May 16th in the evening, the day before the deadline.
Great.
And he said, send us the form, we'll release it. But they've also been approved for exemption.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So 17th North, Center Creek, Horseshoe Irrigation Company, Liberty Irrigation, Minersville, Nephi, and Penguich.
Yeah, 7.
Okay. Oh. Is there any reason to think that we might be treating that Paradise one differently than these others? I just want to make sure, if we're extending them grace through the mid-July, it sounds like, at least for 5 of them, we feel fairly confident. For those other 2, is that a problem? I don't know.
Oh, the other 2, Center
Yeah.
Creek and Horseshoe, Ethan. They wouldn't return our call. They were answering the phone, then they stopped answering the phone.
And Paradise started answering the phone at some point. Okay.
Emails, yeah. And then, no, it was Center Creek never answered the phone, never answered an email to me, nor to the engineer said, he said, I think they're not going to meet her.
Okay.
And that's all we heard. So.
Madam
Yeah, go
Chair.
ahead, Blaine, please.
Question, logistically, there are a lot of these. What I'm curious right now, prepping for the next meeting, logistically, how are we going to go through these? One at a time, one motion on each one, or is there going to be a?
Can we take them in one motion? Will that suffice?
Yeah, we've discussed that, much like we did with the ARPA funds. We had 70 of them, and we did pieces and had the similar ones. With these, they're just all similar, is that we're just withdrawing the funds, unless you want to separate the 7 without a form and the rest with a form.
I would suggest that you're giving us this information. We're talking through it now. We have the opportunity to ask questions about them individually now, and I guess we can have another crack at asking individually later, but it feels like doing it in one motion makes.
I think one motion makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, okay. And so to that point, are there, I had this question of equity and extension periods. I feel like I'm satisfied with your answer, but are there other questions on any of these individual ones? Or?
They've been given every chance in the world, every one of these.
Yeah.
It says then the board members who got copied on the emails on Charlie.
I was gonna say. Yeah.
That was on purpose.
Yeah.
I wanted the board members to be very aware that we were communicating as best we could with them. And my staff even made sure that Candace's recommendation, if there's a phone call, write a memo to the project that that you talk to them on the phone, that you.
Great.
So trying to document all of that.
Randy said it like it is. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink.
And it's a good question about Paradise.
I mean, that's just where I'm a little like,
You're
tricky
right. They
about-
did not have all the requirements done by May 17th, period.
okay,
They just didn't.
I guess for me personally,
So-
I'm just going to square it as they interacted, they started to interact at a certain point.
Yeah.
And other board
I mean,
members
they
can
did
feel
send
however
in
they
the
wanna feel about
application,
that.
or the request to convert.
Okay.
Did not
Okay.
have everything completed as they were supposed to.
Shalane's come up. Are you?
That's
Okay.
the only point I was going
Yeah.
to make that you've
Yeah.
covered without me, so.
Thank you.
Is
That's
that they
helpful.
did submit an official request.
Thank you. Okay.
Others have not. So
That's
we are
helpful.
simply, staff has done their due diligence and tried to get everyone to submit something. There were 2 that didn't communicate at all. Staff's recommendation is still the same.
Great.
Deadline was not met with any paperwork, so we're recommending they all be withdrawn.
Thank you.
I think one motion is sufficient unless you have questions.
Great. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, as an example, Minersville, he called me the night before the deadline
Okay.
and just said, we're not gonna.
Yeah, and I mean.
I said,
and
okay.
Feels sufficient.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he said, send me
Yeah.
the form, so I did, and I didn't get it back.
Okay. Thank you.
So-
All right. Well, thank you.
And we have stuff written down and
Perfect.
different notes written down about things.
Blaine, are you okay taking that motion since you've got it? Okay. All right.
Charlie
Great.
doesn't
Thank
wanna do
you.
Did we see who has the most of these withdrawals?
I had quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Randy, can I go back to you just making the point about, I think you did a nice job of articulating what feels like the board's preference around redeploying these funds is. Can you make that point one more time for the record? And
Well, I think it's just the fact that you don't have the time frame to go out on the street and start all over. You've got to be able to allocate this back to those other entities that have made requests, and because of legislation change, allows them to be funded at a higher amount than they were previously. I think you just need to pursue that accordingly and move on with life, because we don't have the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fact.
thank you. Kyle?
Marisa, have you already had a handful of inquiries about additional funding? About if additional funding becomes available?
Yes. Your area.
Oh, I kind of surmised that.
It's all your guys.
As Rick called you, he's asking.
Not every single one of them, unless they've said something to their project manager, like Lehigh, I don't know, Tom, did they say, if there's more funds, we want some? Yeah, but there's a need.
Okay.
And Tom is, like in Lehigh, it's, in his reports, he said, this amount, we're gonna do this amount for the previous reports, this will still not be enough money to fully meter their system. So they do have that. I do want to make, if I may, Madam Chair, make a comment going along with what Randy said. If we put out an application period, get in applications, is their business license active? Do they have a water conservation plan? How long is it going to take them to respond to Heidi King? And how long, you know, and these are just some of the things we've been through.
Thank you.
And I'm beating up a little bit more on Paradise Irrigation. The water conservation plan with Heidi has been very difficult.
Thank you.
They sent something in, she asked for more requests, and it was quiet until, yeah.
Well, it feels like the strategy is optimal given what we're dealing with. Dana Van Horn, we'll go to you.
Hi. I'm struggling with the Paradise thing, for lack of being polite, I guess, for what it's worth. I feel like, this company is looking at $2.7 million in grant money, and they can't be bothered to respond to staff or fulfill their requirements. And it just seems to me like it seems rather arrogant, and I'm hesitant to agree with extending a deadline for an entity that is disrespectful to the staff and to their time, and to the original intent of everything. But I just wanted to put that out there to you guys, that's how I feel about it. And, if the rest of the board agrees, I'm happy to vote to do that. But I feel like they're being, that it's not exactly ideal for an entity to behave that way.
Yeah. Thank you, Dana. Any other questions or comments? All right.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a note. I had Marty Bushman duck over a little bit and chat with me before, commenting that I'm not sure you can do this without another application period. He was going to go check code.
Okay.
So he will check that before we meet again. I have a feeling, I don't know. I don't know that that's in code.
Okay.
But Marty's our attorney, so he was going to check on it.
Okay.
Just to make you aware.
Well,
I think we're all much more comfortable with just being able to get this back out.
Yes.
And as I mentioned to him, because we've already received applications.
Yes. Okay.
We have received applications that could use this funding. We just weren't able to give them what they needed at the time because of the maximum grant amount that was set that has now been changed. And those that requested additional funds and couldn't get all that they asked for. So I believe we've received applications enough to cover this. I don't see us having to do a new one, but I just wanted you to be aware. Our attorney is looking at it currently. So
I think maybe, it's just what Randy's point, the point that Randy made, and I think the board shares a sentiment of this, it's just, we've got to get these funds out. And so we're risking these funds not being deployed. And I just want to ask to understand this. If these funds don't get deployed, my understanding is that they don't necessarily roll back into like some state pot where the state redistributes them to other Utah uses. They leave the state of Utah, is my understanding. And so I just think that we're taking maybe the most conservative approach, but I don't see any other approach. I guess maybe what I'd like to understand is if some application or request that's new found its way to you, under what we're talking about, if it were complete and new, and you weren't hunting down a business license or trying to get response or anything else, under the direction you're hearing from us, would you deny that?
So, if I may.
Yeah.
A couple of things. First of all the ones that applied for the second round for additional funds, Weber Basin, Roy, what's that? Third round. And remember, we had to do the prioritization, and they only got 4 million or 6 million. Their application said 10 million. So that's already on their application. It's just that we didn't have the funds available at the time. So we have that gap available on those. The second part is, I'll give the example. It's Midway Irrigation. I know they've got their stuff done because they did a loan with us.
Yeah.
So everything's done. If we were to do an application period, it would have, my thoughts that I've brought up is we have to detail every single thing that has to be completely done when the application, we don't have time for them to start a water conservation plan and figure out what a water conservation plan is. Get a UEI number. The unique entity ID number has been a nightmare for the systems that didn't already have them. And that's taking months. And we cannot contract with them until they have that. So there's just all these requirements that, unless the application came in and we knew that they have everything in there, and we do have some other entities out there that didn't apply for a third round that maybe could use some more funds, So we've got some that are proven applicants that already have all the stuff done because everything they submitted to us we'll just copy and paste it over to the other, file. Because their water conservation plan's done. They're, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Candace. She's just agreeing.
Yes, I was just agreeing, Madam Chair, and just looking at the time,
That's great. Yeah, let's go ahead. So thank you. And I think it sounds like you have the sentiment of the board, but then if that ends up being inconsistent with the advice of the Attorney General, just have to come back and talk through. But I think even with the advice of the Attorney General, perhaps you could take the sentiment of the board and push those two together.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right,
I
thank you.
agree. I
All
think our intent is to move as quickly as we can. We do have applications in for, I think, much of that money. So, yeah.
These next couple of items stand between us and lunch and also just being able to process everything we're hearing. I do need to go back and mention, I didn't ask anyone about the minutes at the beginning of the agenda. Very important stuff here. Was there, I mean, it is very important. It is very important. Okay.
Good.
Charles thinks they look great.
I asked Shannon a question.
Lots of thumbs up.
I thought she tripped me up, but
All right.
she had an explanation for my question.
All right.
So
Charles, you seem so enthusiastic about them. I hope you'll consider enthusiastically making the motion to approve them. All right. So. Well, it felt like we just jumped in, but I realized midway through. Thank you. Now, recognizing that we're short on time, but we need to make sure that we're hitting the important points in the information to the board. Candace, can I just turn to you to manage getting through what we need to get through? I know that we have information on status of funds.
And that's
in
what I
the
was going to
report.
offer,
Okay.
Madam Chair, is we typically have Shalane go through the status of fund. It is in your packet. I mean, so we can forego that unless there's any questions that you guys have on the status of funds.
I suggest that unless there's anything that you as the department would like to highlight for us, I suggest that we work with you all offline on any questions that we have. Does that work okay with everyone?
Yeah, and I don't think there was anything I really needed to highlight today anyway. There's not a lot of change. I did just want to, since we don't normally put withdrawals in the status of funds, but there was a significant amount, and I wanted you to be aware of what was happening. That's why I prepared this sheet that I handed out to you, just so you could be aware. Just with the withdrawals and conversions, staff's recommendation, you're getting almost $25 million back in ARPA funds today. So that's all I wanted to highlight anyway.
Thank you.
Great. And then just a couple other items. We had discussed about talking more about water conservation and potentials with board guidelines and discussions with Shelby Erickson, our conservation manager, and Shalane. We think it might be best to spend a little time maybe doing like a little workshop in conjunction with our tour in August to talk through more of the options with the board that give us a little bit more time, especially right now where we're out of time. So if that sounds good to the board.
That's great.
Okay. And then we were going to have a dam safety discussion. Everett Taylor is planning on presenting at the August board meeting on the water rights side of things. And maybe at that time, Tom, you could talk about water resources side, if that's okay. So we'll forego it today. And then the other big item was just talking about ARPA and withdrawals, which we already covered. So those were the few items that we had for information to the board.
Okay, thank you. Do board members have any other items to discuss? All right, well, I'm going to go to Blaine Ibsen for a motion right at 12:01 on the dot. All right, is there a second? All in favor? All right, thank you. We'll be back at 1 p.m.